Right, we are moving right along as we have talked about all of the problems that the nation was faced with during the industrial age, like eating rat dung and meat, working long hours, having children working. Now we have a group of reformers that are trying to do something and change the negative aspects of the industrial age as they see it. And they are the populist and progressives. We will talk about both of those groups here today in our wonderful presentation. The first question that we need to ask ourselves is, really, how did Americans attempt to deal with the negative consequences? Well, they attempt by really starting out with farmers actually trying to reform the system. Now, farmers were not happy with the money supply. We think today, oh, you use a dollar bill, you use, any type of coin, it'll be accepted anywhere you go. But it wasn't so set in stone back then. You had different banks issuing money. You had some people using gold coins, some people using silver coins, some people using paper money. So people weren't actually sure what the money supply was, and depending on where you travel in the country, that type of money would be more accepted than others. And the federal government at this time really didn't have any answers. So you had a populist. It is a reformer, more than likely a farmer, but they did expand, and you had other people that supported this movement. And they didn't like many aspects of the industrial age. To be really specific, what did farmers dislike? What did populists dislike the most? And it's this picture right here of the railroad. They did not like railroad companies. Try to think now, why would farmers not like railroad companies or railroads in general? Hopefully you've got some really good ideas. We're going to talk now about how the farmers are going to fight back and why they're going to fight back. You had something called the National Grain Movement, started by Oliver Kelly in 1867, and it was basically educational. They did pass Granger laws, and they passed laws directed at the railroad. The railroad companies could charge whatever they wanted. Who are shipping their products on railroads? The farmers. So, for example, here in Missouri, you will see that it's going to be cheaper to ship something from St. Louis to Kansas City than it is to ship something from St. Louis to Cape Girardeau. Why? Because that shipping rate from St. Louis to Cape Girardeau is going to be used heavily, and the railroads could charge whatever they want. So the populists and these farmers, they really want to regulate. That's the key word here, regulation. They want to regulate the railroad, and they want the government or Congress or state legislatures to tell railroad companies they can't just charge whatever they want. So here's our first example of farmers fighting at the state level. Munn versus Illinois. The Supreme Court upheld a law that set maximum rates for grain storage facility operators within the state of Illinois. Again, this is this idea that you have the state or the government kind of protect the public's interest. They also try to fight at the national level with the Interstate Commerce Act being passed in 1887. Railroads became the first industry subject to government regulation. Why? Because people like farmers are upset about what's going on. This 5-member enforcement board known as the ICC was supposed to regulate railroad rates, which they really didn't do a good job. Now we're going to a new court case, Wabash versus Illinois, which is going to overturn Munn versus Illinois. And they said that states cannot regulate interstate commerce. States cannot do that. What is interstate commerce? Commerce from one state or trade from one state to another. Who does that? You're right, the federal government. So it kind of goes back to this. The Interstate Commerce Commission needs to regulate railroads, and they're not doing it. So farmers continue to be upset. Let's try to understand the farmers and the populace a little bit better. Farmers had been becoming a minority within American society. It's kind of like people were getting industrial jobs. They weren't farming the land. They were moving to bigger towns and cities, and people aren't going to be farmers anymore. And you also see out west where people where farming became a new thing. It's going to be taken over by big business, and they have these big farms called bonanzas. And also too, it all has to do with the money supply. So there's more people coming into America because of immigration and a high birth rate. And farmers really don't have, they have a lot of debt, and they go to the bank and they can't get a loan, or they're in debt, and they want to try to do something about it. And they also feel that middlemen are charging, like if they want to store something in a grain facility, they have to pay, or they have to pay high railroad fees. So they're upset about it. Just to kind of show you and illustrate this, they're losing money. Why are they losing money? Because they're producing more things. Because of new technology, they are making a lot more. It's almost like if the farmer would work from 6 a.m. to noon, he would make more money than if he worked a 12-hour day, which most farmers did. So the more that farmer produces, what happens to the prices? The prices go down. And also, too, farmers can't get loans. They're in debt. They want an increased money supply. All right, so here is the start of the Populist Party. Yes, they had their own political party, probably one of the most, I guess you could say, most successful third parties in the United States. They met in St. Louis in 1892, and here really are what they want. They feel like there's corruption. There's two political parties, Republican and Democrat, and both of these political parties say that gold should be the legal tender. So they wanted the coinage of gold, but there is more silver available. So they wanted more inflationary money. They wanted silver. Here's their platform here. So make sure you write all of these down and understand it. People should own the railroads. Oh my gosh, is that socialism? Well, maybe. They wanted the government to own the railroads. So yes, you could consider that a form of socialism. They wanted a merit system for the civil service. Basically, if anybody had a government job at this time, it was basically dependent on who you knew. Okay, who's your dad know? Who owes you a favor? But they wanted a merit system, which is actually a system we have today. Like even if today, if you want to be a post office worker, you have to take a civil service exam, and you have to do well to actually get that type of job. They wanted the free and unlimited coinage of silver. I think this is their most important and their point. They wanted to keep coining silver. They wanted money to be readily available. They also wanted a graduated income tax, which is again based on how much you make. They want the government to own and operate the railroads, telegraph, and telephone. And they wanted the government to reclaim lands from the railroad companies. If you remember the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862. They wanted a secret ballot, and you're thinking, oh yeah, that's a pretty general idea. They didn't have that back then. No, they typically didn't, especially in the South. I mean, you voted, and everybody knew who you voted for. And there was a lot of political pressure, peer pressure. You would lose your job if you voted for the wrong person. They also wanted an 8-hour workday and the direct election of... Now, a children's storybook, you probably know it as a movie, was The Wizard of Oz, written by Frank Baum. He wrote this children's book, and many people at the time, and even today, think that the book was actually written by the populist movement. In just a little bit, you will be getting in groups to try to figure out who these characters are. Like, for example, this is Dorothy, but who does she really represent in the populist movement? Just to kind of think about that. You'll be thinking about this movie and who they represent in the populist movement. And actually, in the real life story, these shoes were not red, but they were silver. Who wins? Do the populists win? No, they don't. They really support two candidates, William Jennings Bryan, who was known kind of as a coward because he also accepted the nomination for the Democratic Party. And he's going to lose the election of 1896 and in 1900. So in 1900, the country adopts the gold standard, and it confirms the nation's commitment to gold, and it's a victory for the forces of conservatism. So you see big business being happy about this. You see people that were in debt, like the farmers, not too happy because it's harder for them to get loans, and they have more debt, and it's harder for them to get money. Now we're going to talk about the progressives. These are reformers that were mostly in the city, and they took a lot of ideas from the populists. They wanted political and social reforms. They wanted really to fix the problems of urbanization and industrialization. So they're going to do things like child labor, You have many people that are going to advocate for consumers. You had many people that were for like birth control. So it is a time of idealism and for social, economic, and political reform. Basically, another key word we're going to throw out, regulation. They want the government to regulate the economy to help the people. And again, this is a good chart for, kind of a good table for you to write down and understand just the main motives of the progressive movement. We had three main progressive presidents: Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson, which we'll be talking about. Just to tell you about Teddy Roosevelt, he was a really strong leader. He is going to give great speeches where he's going to be screaming, and he wanted a square deal, which is a program that he sent to Congress to support many of the progressive ideas. He didn't like bad trust, which means, for example, trust, another word for trust is monopoly. He thought that there were some trusts that were okay if they supported the public and they benefited the public, but there were other trusts that he did not like, and he thought they should be broken up. So he's going to begin over 40 antitrust suits. He became known as the trust buster, even though his successor, William Howard Taft, will bust more trusts in less time. Just to give you an example about what he did, the United Mine Workers went on strike, and Roosevelt summoned the owners and the union leaders to the White House. When the owners refused, he's like, I'm going to take over the mines. And so they agreed to arbitration, and you see workers did get some things that they wanted. Also, he is known as the conservation president. I don't know if you've heard of the Sierra Club, but you will see a lot of like national parks will be formed. He really is in support of preserving nature. The next president, William Howard Taft, you see Teddy Roosevelt will support Taft, his former Secretary of War, but after he's president, Teddy Roosevelt can't stand him. It's like Taft was really a better judge than he was a president. He supported progressive reforms, but he really was really conservative. He raised the tariff. He supported conservative Republicans in Congress. But he did busted half as many trusts as Roosevelt in a short amount of time. He passed the 16th and 17th Amendment, and he increases the power of the ICC. He will be challenged in the next election. He's only a one-term president by Woodrow Wilson, and also Teddy Roosevelt runs again. Progressivism was very popular, and you see, for example, Wilson wanted low tariffs, Roosevelt wanted high. And Wilson, on the other hand, didn't think giant corporations could actually exist. That is the conclusion of our lecture on populists versus progressives. I hope you have an understanding. Now you will do some activities in a small group to help you better understand this.